How's the long weekend? Did anyone do any selenium stuff? No, right? But okay, I think we're getting closer. So let's drive next few weeks strong, and then hopefully be ready for the job program, and spend before the end of the year. Hopefully, you guys get a job, right? So, um, with that being said, any questions about the mobile stuff so far? I know that we had a couple of homework. One was to review the framework, and if you had questions. So the way we're going to do is, I'm going to start explaining it, and if you don't understand a specific part of it, I should be able to answer it. And then, so that's the first part. Second part, I'll walk you through some locator strategies because it's slightly different than how we do it in web. And then maybe do a scenario together, right? So that will get you guys in the right path, right? And then, but before that, I just want to go over a schedule, slight change on schedules and stuff. So, by the way, you guys like this bed. You guys have done really well with attendance and um, the lab hours and all of that. So I think we see that in the result. Like a lot of you are doing really well with materials, and especially with the first final project, right? Most of you has done well. Uh, but now, if you really feel that you're behind, and be honest with yourself, right? Don't take on this new mobile project, right? Just take a step back, and then either ask Deepak or myself, like, hey, I'm gonna skip the mobile project. I want to refocus on the web. Can you guys assign me some more scenarios for web? We can figure out some scenarios for you, right? So I think that's important for me. But if you feel like, okay, no, I'm gonna go with the mobile, then it's not a problem for either for us. But it's mostly you have to kind of judge that for yourself. That, hey, maybe I should just continue to do web and be good at that, and sort of take on the newer task and newer stuff, which is cool, but ultimate goal is to get a job, right? So you rather be good at one thing really well, and then but if you did really well with the first web all the 5 tasks that we've given, then yes, you should be doing web for sure. I mean, for mobile for sure. uh, all right, let me just all right, before we do this, let's just go over the calendar.
Is it recording, right?
Yes, it's recording. um, so we started around, is that March? March 25th, right? So we've we are at July now, so we have this week. So today we're gonna kind of complete as far as what the Android looks like, right? Uh, give you some assignments, and then Thursday officially the mobile automation project starts, right? So give you a Jira ticket, and you'll continue to automate, right? And then we go on with this, obviously this weekend, 15 until 18th, right? Now, this time around, because of Saturday, we covered some materials and all of that stuff, right? In the past, Saturday was kind of an optional, so that kind of helped us, cover a lot of the grounds as far as your misunderstanding. So what we used to do is like we would take a class and then do explanations and cut on lectures and things like that. That's why we're able to kind of cover a lot of the ground in that sense. So it's a good thing. But meantime, what I want to do, because we have a little bit of an overlap with the new batch, right? So the new batch starts in 22nd. And then what we used to do is, because we changed the format a little bit, what we used to do is we used to have job program running, remember? Job program running at the end, and that will run Tuesdays and Fridays, something like that, right? But now that we've kind of doing a little bit of a different format, what are we going to do for last few weeks? We are going to have our, so next week we're going to follow the same schedule, right? After that, we're going to follow Wednesdays and Saturdays, right? And that will go on. So Wednesdays we will we will do the RESTful API, right? But after that, and I know for some of you guys the schedule might be thing, this is going to be 31st and 3rd, right? Then we are going to have 2 more weeks of just mock interviews, interview preparations, questionnaires. If you have any questions, cover those materials. Now we are able to do that. In the past, we were lacking that, and we were not able to do that. Because we covered a lot of ground, we're going to utilize that time to continue to prep you for that program, right? And right after that, there will be job program that starts, right? And that will be separate schedule that Robin is going to walk you through. So the only thing is, that we just have to open up Wednesday for next few
That's
weeks.
from the 24th. The first
Yeah, so
Wednesday is from the 24th.
24th. So we will do, maybe this is when we'll probably start doing the RESTful API stuff, and that's only 2 classes, so that shouldn't take too much of the time. Any questions on that schedule?
Oh, I need to make sure. We will have 24th and 21st Wednesday, yeah? Can you tell me Wednesday's day?
Hold on, 1 second. What was your question?
I need just Wednesday's day.
So 24 and 31st, that's
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on Saturday, you're gonna make a recording?
Saturday it's gonna be like a lab hours.
Just one lab because like I can't come on Saturdays.
No, Saturday is gonna be lab hours. The lecture is gonna be 24th and 31st, so you won't be missing that stuff. And the only 2 lectures that we really have is the REST API stuff, right? And I'm going to try to cover this on 18th and 24th, right? And the rest will be mostly just mock interviews, and then the topics that you're struggling with, right? Or maybe a test scenario that you came up with and is trying to automate and need help from Deepak Asan, we can try those out. For the last 2 weeks, sorry for the inconvenience, guys. I know it's a little bit of a schedule change, but you know,
And
everything doesn't go
after this, after 31st?
After 31st, well, you have to kind of make a decision. I'm going to announce this, I guess, if you're going to go into a job program or not, right? So if you go into a job program, that's a separate 4 weeks, but that's just 1 day a week that you come in, and then there's just different itinerary for that. I don't want to touch that topic on that, but after that, yes, that's the whole plan, right? You go through the job program for a month, and then, to be honest with you, sometime even before a month, if we have positions open, you might have to go into interviews and stuff, right? So that's what happened with the last batch. Like, we could not finish the job program. We had to send people out for interviews because position doesn't wait for it, especially the internal ones, right? But if there's nothing coming on, like, intentionally, like there's nothing available that we don't know about, then we'll wait. We'll finish the whole program and then roll people out into the market.
For Monday, 22nd and 30 and 29th.
Guys, one person, please, if you have a questions, please ask me.
When job program will be started?
Right? So that's what I was just saying, right? What I'm saying is 31st, right? You will have to make a decision at some point here, either 19th or 24th, if you're going to go into a job program or not. If you are, the job program will most likely start on the 2nd week of August, right? So you have your entire August will be the job program. You go into the market in September. Now, for some people, if we have a position available in August and they really need a candidate, you probably have to rush one or two of you guys into those programs, right? But most of you expect to go into the market in September, but the full August, you're not done, right, until you get a job. That's how I see it. So it's kind of finishing the first part of your journey, but the second part is next 3 months, maybe next 2 weeks. It doesn't matter, right? Some people will get a job in 2 weeks. Like from the last batch, we had 7 people got a job already, but then there's still 4 or 5 people waiting. Doesn't mean they're not good. Some of them are really good. Just sometimes things doesn't always work out the way you plan it. But it's a 3 months. Your mindset has to be 3 to 5 months. I'm going to keep trying and see where it lands, right? You have to keep doing interviews, and eventually, things are gonna go on your way. But to answer your question, entire August will be the job program, right? And it's a 1 day a week, so it's not too much on you.
So our class will be finished within 3rd August, right?
Yes. So officially, this is our mobile automation project will finish here, right? And then we start our REST API. We're gonna finish second half of this class is going to be REST API. 24th we'll do REST API again, right? And then there will be some work, and Asan and Deepak will guide rest of the way. But there's no new lecture. There's no new materials. Vishal is happy that we're done with this crap. Make sense?
I'm depressed. I don't get to see your face again.
Yeah. Yes. Any other questions? But you can hear my voice. If you really miss it.
I don't need We'll do something exciting for that. That's what you said, right? And then that's good. That's interesting.
But any other questions? Now, I want you to ask me question here. I don't want you to go to Robin and then ask some other questions and then he comes back to me. I want to clear everything about the schedule here and out. Are we all clear on these schedules? Okay, good. Robin, you heard this, right? They're all clear on this schedule. Yeah, I'm just kind of going over the schedule. So, all right. Any questions? Like I said, this is not the end. There will be another job program running for another month, right? So if you really have questions, Deepak is always here. Deepak and Asan, obviously you can reach them in Slack, right? They've been supporting you guys with the homework and all those. If you have any questions, I'm always here at like 5:30, right? So, feel free to bring the questions up, right? And then as far as the job program stuff, I don't know how Robin's schedule is. If he's free on 19th, he can maybe take in half an hour and do a... Yeah, just to go over the entire job program. So they get to have like a week or 2 weeks to decide if that's what they want to do, right? But yeah, either 19th or maybe next week. The earlier you do, better. It gives them more time to decide. So maybe next week, next Monday, Robin will take about half an hour of your time and walk you through the job program. And if you have any questions, then you can answer regarding the job program. All right?
July 27th, Saturday, right? That even I'm planning, right? So just make sure when July 27th, Saturday.
Oh, you can mention that, right? When you come in next week. All right? Okay. Yeah, he's trying to do like this event thing with...
Party?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't call it a party. It's more like a dinner thing, right?
We're planning to give you guys a certificate, course completion certificate, and kind of like, lunch.
And a medal and a trophy.
They're looking for a job, not a certificate. All right. So if you don't have a job, except for Gia, he wants a certificate for some reason.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not?
I'm not a big degree guy. But anyhow, any questions before we move on to the new things? All right. Excellent.
I have a question about framework.
Yeah. So
after the review or
yeah,
before?
let me walk through. Maybe that may answer some of your questions, right? But if you and then as I'm walking through, if you have a question, definitely I can answer that. All right. All right. So guys, let's focus a little bit, and hopefully we can cover some of the things. So when you think of Appium, right? So we had something similar like share SD to kind of drive our engine, so to speak, right? So for Appium, we also have a class called Appium wrapper. That's kind of the source of your. This is where we start the engine, so to speak, and set all the values that needs to kind of get set. Um, but things that you don't have to touch all the time, right? That's the key, right? You don't want to be coming into this class and change something, right? It actually gets really better. Like, believe it or not, when you're working at a company, you might be working for 5 years, and you may not even touch a single line here. Does that make sense, right? But I also want you to know how to build this stuff, right? Um, one of the since we are in this topic, one of our candidate from the last batch, and he was in an interview, and they asked him, "Hey, um, we're gonna do a share, screen sharing, and I want you to build a framework, right?" Which is insane, right? I mean, in how can you build a framework in 1 hour? So he couldn't, like, he should have countered that, right? He could have said, and that's his fault. Like, for him, he's really good candidate. He's a very smart guy. But what I'm trying to say is that he got nervous, he got worried, he started to do like and then he just abruptly um, ended the interview, right? So that's kind of what I wanted guys to learn from that lesson is that don't get frustrated when someone asks. Anyone can ask you anything, right? You're there for an interview, so they have the right to ask you anything. Now, if the question doesn't make sense, you have to counter that. You could say, hey, framework is a huge thing. It's not something that can get built overnight or things like that. But if you want me to build like a sample framework or whatever, give me some time. Give me over the weekend. I'll spend a few hours and spin up something for you, right? So then you can kind of come back and be like, give me a scenario and I'll spin it up and then I'll write a scenario for you and send it back to you. Does that make sense? So I think that's more of a good counter. If they don't still agree, be like, well, then I don't think it's the right position for me. It's okay to walk away from an interview, right? But you want to walk away with the right attitude, knowing what you're doing. So yes, you may go into an interview and they say, hey, build a framework here in the next 2 hours. No, that's impossible, right? So you can say, hey, I can write your test. Give me the test that you want to automate. I can start from scratch and just do it in a class and just to show them that you know how to work. But that's not the most optimal way to do it. So I want to make sure that you guys are making just because someone asks you to do something, you don't have to do it, right? You can counter it with the right answer, and that might be the selling point of your interview, right? You never know. Okay, so we had to build a class that drives our Appium engine, right? So here, similar to WebDriver, we have something called Appium driver, right? And Appium driver comes from Java client library, which is right here, Java client library, right? So, and then we have something called private. So this is private, is staying here. Initialize an Appium driver. Appium driver equals to build Appium driver. Now build Appium driver is another private method, right? So if we go into build Appium driver, that's all this one does, right? It just builds the Appium driver for us. But this is the main method that does a lot of the crap. So you have your config reader. We have to read some data from the config file, right? So if you look at config reader, we have to read which platform is it running on. We have to read what type of automation name. So for Android, we have to say UI automated too. The reason we have to say UI automator, Appium doesn't directly speak to the devices, right? Appium sends a request to something called UI automator, which is built by Google. Then if it's an Apple product, Appium sends a request to something called XCUI test, right? So if it was Apple, we would have sent XCUI test, right? So these are two kind of a middle layer that is built by Google and Apple for respective platform. Does that make sense? So it used to be UI automator. I don't know. I think we used to call it Android or something. I forgot. But now the most recent version, I think version 24 and above, we have to say UI automator too because they released a new version. So that's that. The mobile version, I think it ignores it for Android, but you can just put 11.4, right? I mean, that's just anything. You can put anything here. And then mobile device, right? You have to give your device name. So device could be the emulator. It could also be the real devices, right? But then you have to run this ADB devices command to get the UDID for that device, right? So that would be your device name. And then you have to give the app path, right? So wherever the path is, wherever your APK file is, that's where you would give your path. Just to remember, .apk means it's an Android app, right? .ipa means it's an iOS app, right? So if you see .ipa file sometime, well, that's an iOS app, okay?
I have a question about safety.
Okay.
We already have installed this APK file here on our emulator.
Okay.
Why we need this APK file?
If you already installed it,
Yeah.
well, if you sometime you'll delete it, right? Or if you, I don't know how the code is written in a way. Sometimes you have to reinstall it, right? If it needs to reinstall it, or if you already installed it, right, for very first time, right? You may not need it. I understand that,
Okay.
but you have to specify the path if you delete the app, right? So if you delete it because every time you'll get a new app, it will be a new build. Because if you already have an existing build, it's not gonna work, right? So if let's say you're working on an app today, and you installed it, which is fine, but tomorrow they say, hey, we made some changes. Here's the new APK, right? So what I recommend is after each test,
Automatically makes an installation.
yes. So when you point it to the right path, well, usually, like I said, there will be an environment called like hockey.app or whatever. They would have some environment where you can download it from, right? And you will point it to that and then run it through. So make sure you're installing the new app every time, right? Not before each test, but before the switch. So you can run your test after each time. So it's not installing before each test, but it's installing when the Appium starts. Because it makes sense to do it, right? Because you will like to have the new app every time, new version.
When I run that test, it's automatically installed on its checks first time.
I think it's checking first if it has it or not.
Because when I run test, it's already installed application.
Right. Yeah, so if it's already installed, it would either override it, right? So if it will look for a version, right? If the copies are same,
Oh.
right? It's not gonna do anything maybe, right? But if the copies are different, then it will override the existing one.
It's different.
Yeah. I mean, it could be version, I mean, under the hood artifacts or whatever. If they see some differences, it will override it, right? But to your point, you would want a new app not before each test, but before each run, right? Because you might get a new version on each run. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
Because I try also without this line, also.
Yeah, it will work because it's looking for an app, right? And it finds it. So that's the whole point. But this is if you wanted to install it for first time. Any other questions here? All right. And then you have Appium server URL. What is this URL? Anyone raise your hand? Bobby? What is this URL?
Appium server.
Oh, What is? I mean, and just an Appium server. You gotta give me a little bit more information. Come on, guys. Did you guys run the test? Okay, go ahead, Rabu.
Server is run on your system, so that's the URL to get to the server on your system.
When you go to gmail.com, what do? Right? You go to gmail.com. It's been hosted somewhere, right? So for our case, the Appium is hosted in this URL. Okay, it's not as pretty as gmail.com is, right? But it is 000 dot and 47. That's the location, so to speak. Within your computer, there's some allocated space where Appium is running, right? And you're pointing to that memory space, if that makes sense, right? So,
And WD hub.
That's
syntax or
that's something that Appium wants us to do.
okay.
Okay, but most importantly, this URL is pointing it to where your Appium server is running. Now, Appium server could be running in Jenkins or other places, right? And you may have to give that path, whatever that path is. But wherever server is running, usually is this path 0000 dot. All right. And then we're getting a platform name, which is config reader. Now everything is pretty much easy because we've assigned all of the external details into that config reader, right? And then we need a desired capabilities, right? So before when we ran test on Chrome, only desired capabilities, so to speak, that we had to do was system property. Remember that, right? We had to specify where is that Chrome driver sitting. Make sense? Well, with mobile, it's a little bit more. That's all you have to think, right? We have to add a little bit more. So we have to create an object, right? So in this case, the object data type is desired capability. If you think of when we, ancient time when we did the accounts, right? We could have added the customer's name, first name, last name, account balance. These are all of the objects related to the customer. In this case, these are all of this data that we need to set and kind of like wrap around a desired capability object, right? Everything is sort of an object. So that's when object-oriented programming comes into handy. So we are setting a capability, and then automation name will be whatever the config reader get automation name, right? So if you go back to you see mobile automation name, that's what we are reading. So whatever you had here, that's pretty much we are reading. Same thing with the platform name, config reader get mobile device name, false, and like I said, we build this out here, right? We're setting we are reading everything in our config reader. No reset. I think after the test, if you don't want to reset, you say no reset equals to false. These are default values that, like I said, you don't probably have to change it at all. Config reader get mobile app path. So this gives me where is this app is sitting, right? So this is the path that will give us that. New command timeout. So all we are saying is that, hey, just wait. If Appium doesn't see any command for 19 seconds, I think, right? So if it doesn't see it for this many milliseconds, then only throw an error. So because sometimes Appium takes the app takes time to load and stuff like that. This is slightly different than WebDriver wait. It's just saying if Appium doesn't receive any new command from your script, right? We're just kind of giving a max time for it to wait, right? And that can change based on your app. You may work on an app that takes longer or whatever may be the case, then we have a bigger issue, right? That we have to bring that up with the dev team and figure out why it takes so long. But most importantly, this is kind of a standard timeout. So if Appium doesn't receive any new command, it will throw an error after when it expires that. Here, slightly different, because see, so when you think of Appium, you're kind of focusing on, think of like a parent object, right? when we go back to the analogy of animal and dogs and cats, so to speak, right? So animal is sort of a parent of all of this type of different type of animals, right? But then when you think of iOS driver and Android driver, they're kind of the child of an Appium driver, right? So what we are saying is that, hey, we are starting an Appium driver, but if platform name, if this platform name is iOS, then I want you to create me, set this Appium driver to new iOS driver, and then the URL will be the same, Appium server URL. The URL is not different. They're both being hosted on the same location, right? But you need to initialize this with iOS driver if it's an iOS product. Make sense, right? If it's not iOS, chances are it's Android. You can also do Windows Phone, but I've never done Windows Phone. But it should be easy. Now Appium does a lot more things. You can do iOS TV, you can do Samsung TV, all of those different things. Anything you can think of, like external devices, Appium has good support for that. So if you're working for like Netflix or something, right? You may have to run your automation on TV because that's where most of the users are viewing, right? So then you have to get creative and see what's available on iOS. You may not get a lot of help online because not everyone is running their chase.com on TV, right? So you have to be realistic with what are your users are. But there are maybe the cases going forward. There's so many things you have to test. You have Alexa's, Siri's, Google Homes. Like how do you automate those things, right? So you have to sort of and Appium has support for those as well. All right. But in our case, if it's not iOS, then obviously also if platform equals to Android, this is the stuff that I'm keeping this here for now in case if we need to use it. Sometime what happens is, when we open up the Android app, it doesn't know which app it is, right? So we're kind of enforcing it, saying, hey, no, this is the IO in conference main activity. Look for this, and then also look for app activity and app package. Don't worry about the two things right now. These are kind of like the artifacts that tells, now this is the app I am going to start working with. Make sense? But most cases you don't need this. In fact, 98% of the time you don't need this. But for some reason, I think I had some issue. That's why I added this. But I don't know if that was the problem. But it got solved somehow, right? But then, if it's obviously, you will initialize an Android driver, and then you'll create a new URL, passing the URL, and also the second value would be the capabilities that you're setting. Okay. I know it's a lot of information, but that's I wouldn't stress too much about this because, like I said, these are the stuff that you will not be touching, but you need to understand it. If someone sends an invalid platform, like let's say if it's not iOS and Android, maybe it's some typo or something, right? They're trying to set Android, but they just added in it. We're just gonna throw a new. We're going to throw an exception saying unsupported operation exception, invalid platform name, and whatever that platform name is. So whenever you write a code or like a base type of code, like in base page or in a wrapper class, try to add a proper exception. So when an error happens, well, hopefully you know what's happening, right? So like in your case, you're getting some error now. So it's talking about something about HTTP client, things like that. So it's something we probably like pointing into the URL or things like that, right? So at least can kind of put you in the right direction. If you just say error or stack trace, it might not be too helpful. Yeah, and then at the end, you'll just return an Appium driver, right? So if it was Android, if it was iOS, this will be filled with iOS driver. If it's Android, it will be filled with Android driver. But Appium will support both because this is the parent of both iOS and Android or Windows or TV or whatnot, right? All of the drivers are pretty much underneath Appium. Any questions? Now, there are a couple of things we are doing different here. So when you think of like Appium driver, right? We are not, um, you know how we had like a before class and after class. We can do that, like that, no doubt about it, right? But it didn't make sense. We can also say, hey, if Appium, like let's say you call something Appium related, right? So let's say app dot tap, like let's say mobile element dot tap. So you call something related to Appium. So if Appium was not initialized, what's the error that you're going to get? Let's say I call something that no, the Appium is running, right? But Appium was not initialized. So if something is not initialized, if something was not set, and you call something, you're going to get like null point exceptions, right? So get familiar with null point exceptions. So that means you have not set Appium, but you're calling an Appium to do something for you. So in that case, Appium will not. So what we are saying is that, hey, get me an Appium driver. If Appium equals to null, right, initialize the Appium driver. Does that make sense? And if it's not null, that means it's already been initialized. So we are not going to duplicate the initialized driver. Now, before also works, but I'm just trying a different approach to this, right? So in this case, you don't have to have a before method. Well, if it's null, I'm going to initialize it. If it's not null, then I'm not doing anything because I have one live already. So that avoids the duplicate initializations. But after, we don't know when we're gonna end, right? So that's the key thing. Therefore we're going to end. We're just going to quit. So we're saying, hey, but this is only get executed if your future file has a mobile tag on it, right? Because you don't want to quit an Appium driver when you're running a web test. It's irrelevant, right? So we want to make sure that we only want to run. So tiny little details, those things are super important for to be a programmer. But believe me, once you kind of get going, you'll solve problems. Like it's super easy. But then, well, I wouldn't say super easy, but you'll continue to solve problems and play ping pong all day. So that's it. Any questions on Appium wrapper? All right, so let's do base page and then we'll take a break, and then after that we'll go over the locators. Well, base page is no different, right? It's we have a mobile base page, and then we have a constructor, right? And this constructor calls something called init page elements, right? You know how we had the wait methods? Remember we had the waits up until like 15 seconds? Well, this is the same thing, right? And the code is slightly different. It's I wouldn't say that there's anything special, but this, because of we had to write all of that stuff with Selenium, when Appium they built it, they actually simplified it for us. So we don't have to write all this junk, right? They already took care of that somehow. All we have to do is call our Appium driver here, right? So we say get Appium driver. And the reason I'm able to get Appium driver, so you can also import like this. You know how we did driver wrapper dot, or you can do that, but you can also do like import static framework dot Appium driver get Appium driver, right? So that means because I'm going to reuse this over and over, I don't want to keep saying Appium wrapper dot get Appium driver, Appium wrapper, because you can just kind of like hard code the path, right, and then use it. So that's one way to do it. But if you don't want to do this, you probably have to just, it's not like the end of the world. Right? So you can do this like the way we've been doing it, right? But now you probably have to call it everywhere, right? Get Appium. Well, actually, we're using a different approach here. So in this case, either you can do this or you can do that. I just want to show you guys different ways of doing things, right? It's always not going to look exactly like the way I'm teaching you, right? But you have to adapt to learning and seeing different code base, right? Everyone writes it differently. So that's kind of what you need to understand. So, but this stuff is coming from Selenium Appium library. And then duration of seconds, 15. So what you're saying is that, hey, make sure if it reaches the 15 seconds, and if you didn't find the element by then throw an error. Make sense? But we don't have control over how often we can pull and things like that. Maybe we do, I can explode it, right? But for now, that's fine, as long as it kind of goes up to 15 seconds. This keyword, what it does is, hey, this should be initialized when whoever extends mobile base page, right? So this literally means which page are you dealing with, right? In our case, this is same as calling this, all right? Unfortunately, like I didn't learn Java through school. I just learned Java through books and working. So this kind of stuff threw me off all the time, right? Whenever you see something little like this, I'm like, what does that mean, right? So then you search, you find out, and then make a few mistakes. So if you run into something new, you're always going to run into something new that we didn't go over. Maybe don't freak out. Like just Google things out a little bit, and if someone's really kind at work, just ask them, right? But try to learn it. It's really fun, right? To be able to figure stuff out yourself. So that's that. That pretty much handles this. But the rest of the stuff you should be very familiar with, right? We had something similar, which is click on, right? But instead of a locator, we are calling it something called moible element. Make sense? So moible element covers both iOS and Android. And we are saying moible element dot click, and rest is pretty much we know. Here, when we're clicking on it, we usually run into an exception called no such element exception. When that happens, I want you to take a screenshot. I want you to send an email notifications, right? And then also print me the stack trace, and then throw new no such element except, because I still need to see the element exceptions, right? And then we are saying unable to locate the element using moible element.toString, right? ToString means whatever that moible element is, give me that as a string form, okay? Any questions on this piece of code? Instead of a locator, instead of a by object, we are using a moible element object, which is essentially the same.
How can I do screenshot?
Well, that's not a concern right now, but this is a code that we may have to do at some point, right? So a lot of time we may not, or you may see engineers not implementing stuff. Maybe it's not important right now, right? Maybe something that we can do later. Maybe higher priority stuff is now that we have to handle. Things like that is good to have, but honestly, I don't really care about screenshot. If I just read the logs, I can understand what's happening, right? So, but if it's going to be a full-fledged reporting system, then you have to take a screenshot, right? And we can take care of that as part of our project. Same thing goes with all the other ones. Nothing really. One is to set value. Is element displayed? Similar to our get text. And then if you wanted to swipe horizontally, I don't know if this code works or not, but something like that you probably have to do swipe right, left, up, down. You have to do some calculation on the screen size. But most importantly, this is kind of what you're dealing with as far as base page. But the concept of base page does not change. So when we do scroller stuff, you may have to add there, right? If there's a new scenario where you're dealing with some sort of toggle button or things like that, you have to add here. Long press, you have to add here, right? Anything new, mobile specific that is can be shared across the entire app, you should be adding those space. Same thing goes with web, nothing different.
What's the point to use What's the point to use protect? It's a public class.
It doesn't matter. I mean, in this case, you can use public as well. Protect. What is the protect means? You sound like you know what you're saying, but it's not true. I know, but what is? Come on, let's do this.
Is the one that is not globally, otherwise.
No. Let's go. I just need one sentence. I was gonna kill him. One sentence. Protected versus public.
So it's a entire package. It can be inherited in different classes, but inside the package only.
Excellent. Right? So protected means we can use this. So let's see where the base. We can use it inside of a framework, right? So we don't really need to use this anywhere besides mobile pages, right? So it's fine. It's in the same directory. So that's why we're able to use it in home screen, menu, and splash screen. But you cannot use it outside of the framework. It's really good usage of protected. So that tells me that, hey, you're not allowed to use this outside of a framework package. Make sense, Vishal? So, protected means, those are tiny things you guys have to brush up on, all right? Everyone should have been able to answer that. That's a very easy one. Any other questions? All right. So now if you go back to our step definition, nothing has changed. So I'm not going to go over that, right? What I want to go over that is how we actually create our field variables. So field variables are slightly different now, right? You have something called, remember it has to be mobile element, right? It's not a by object anymore because that's what our base method expects, a mobile element field variable. So what we do is we create something, let's just create something new, right? We'll say private, the data type will be mobile element, and we'll say submit plan. Now let's say you're implementing Android, right? We are working on an Android app right now, right? What they want us to do is, because it's two different platforms, right? We can use the same variable. I mean, there's other ways we could do that, but this is one of the best thing about using the Java framework. Like the JavaScript doesn't have it. I think Python has it, but it's not well implemented, so to speak, right? So I think this is really cool, because otherwise what you have to do is you have to have two different pages, one for iOS, one for Android, right? And then you have to point to a specific package based on the platform, right? Which we've done it for JavaScript. But when it comes to Java, you can have the same method, because tapping on a skip button is same for both apps, right? Maybe one is in the top, one is at the bottom. It doesn't matter, but the workflow is same. But I don't have to create two different methods, right? I don't have to create two different field variables. That's a lot to maintain. But with Java, this is one of the cool things, is that you can just annotate using a platform-based annotation. So you can say that, and this is not something I built. It came with the framework. You can say Android find by, and then let's just say ID equals to test, right? And then you can have iOS find by, and also let's say maybe use a class name equals to button, right? So when your platform, and then maybe we can have a method. That part is still the same as tap on submit file. Because we extend the mobile base page, right? We have a method call tap on, and then we just pass in the submit button, right? That's it. So what happens is, so let's say when you I'm going to show you two layers of implementation of this, but just if this is Android, right? If the platform is Android, what's going to happen is it's going to ignore this space. It's going to fill this fill variable with this data type. Does that make sense? Anything that is an Android annotated, right? So it's completely going to ignore this piece. Vice versa. If it's iOS, is going to ignore Android. So that is super cool because, and you also have control over anything. You can either use XPath or class name on Android or whatever, right? So you're not kind of boxing into using one type of locators. So the locator goes inside of that annotations. Any questions? All right. We're going to delete this. We can do a scenario together later, so we can cover this. Any questions? All right, so let's take a quick break. F 7:49, around I guess 8:05, we'll resume, and then once we're back, we're gonna do the locators and then do a scenario together. All right, so the very first thing, guys, everyone, please. So the very first thing we need to create an emulator. And then that's it. What is it?
From me, do you need anything?
No, I just sent you the stuff.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, very good. All right. All right, so that starts the emulator. All right, and then see, guys, let's focus. Just 10 more minutes. That's it. And then you say you hit UI Automator View. Then we get this window, right? We can just go through the first scenario that we did, right? So very first thing you have to obviously, I think I already have the app installed here. Do I? Yes, I do. Right? But yeah, I have to delete the app because
Even go to app,
how do I get back?
go to app, push the menu, come down.
Tutorial, right?
Yeah. No.
Show tutorial. Perfect. Save me from restarting the app. Thank you. So once we get here, right, guys, let's just follow so we don't forget the steps. Now let's go to the scenario so that we can follow what's happening. Main menu. Well, mobile menu. Okay. So what we are doing is, remember, we don't have to start anything before, right? Because we have this, the way the Appium wrapper is built, it knows how to do all of those stuff, right? So when you say, I tap on skip button, right? We already know how this stuff works, right? We don't have to worry about that. We needed to build home screen, and then we also needed to build main menu, right? Because those are the two objects that we're interacting with. So the home screen, we say we tap on skip button, and then we get here, right? So within the skip button, how do we actually build out this skip button thing, right? So you tap on skip button, and it's taking the object from this skip button. Now, we don't have the app for iOS, right? Like I said, iOS is slightly different. You need to be provisioned from the company. So for Android, we are using XPath, right? The reason we decided to use XPath. But before we talk about XPath, let's talk about how many different ways we can locate the elements. So we can go back to Documents, Test Automations, Appium Locator Strategy, right? So if we open this doc, it has a bunch of weird stuff, right? So we can identify elements for native or hybrid app using UI Automator view. There are few locators used to locate elements for native. Don't worry about the hybrid, right? We can find element by ID. We can find element by name. We can find element by class name, right? We can find element by accessibility ID. We can also find element by Android UI Automator, and we can find element by X. But we're not gonna go through each one of those, but I'll show you what are those are, right? So let's say we had this.
Can you share us?
Yes, that's a very easy thing to do. But let's say we go here, and then we hit this.
What's the difference? This one and second.
This is like in a debug mode. I just usually use this. But then when you go here, you just locate. You just kind of mouse over the elements that you need to do, right? Now, this one you can find it two different ways, right? I think we tried a few ways, but what we are doing is, if you go back to, we're saying, hey, you see how we write the XPath? You put double slash, means search on entire DOM, right? Entire DOM structure, search for a class name called android.widget.button, right? And if it contains a description equals to skip space, for some reason it had a space there, right? If it contains a description equals to a skip, right? Then obviously fine for it, right? So if you go back to our DOM structure, it's fairly easy. We are looking for a button, right, with the description skip. Make sense, right? So we've just constructed our sort of a custom XPath. It's a very easy one, so I wouldn't call it too custom, but it's, that pretty much gets the job done, right? So in this case, obviously the strategy that we are using is XPath. I don't like XPath, right? Because XPath, what it does is it goes through kind of like a sequential order, so to speak, and it takes longer time. So they usually tells us to use Android UI Automator, and in this case you can say, hey, new UI selector dot description, content dot descriptions, and whatever that value is, right? So I can give you some examples of that later, right? I don't know if that one works here, but I would start with this first, UI Automator options, and then go into XPath. So if that doesn't work, then you can try XPath. This one is a little bit more faster, kind of like CSS locator, right? So, but you know, you want to make it work. So XBet in this case, it's not too bad, right? It's looking for all the buttons, and then the button with the description skip. That's what it. And if it was UI Automator, you would use UI Automator instead of XBet. Make sense? All right. And they're like, what I would say is like go online after tonight, do a lot of read up on Appium has like a huge documentation on how to locate an element. There's a lot of tutorials on how many different strategies of locating element. So spend a couple of hours, read about all those, and trying to figure some of those things out. Obviously, we talked about resource ID. So in our case, we don't have. Where is this thing? So you see how resource ID is, right? So resource ID, it's empty. So there's not much we can do with this. At least for this element, we cannot do anything.
Resource ID means ID.
ID, right? So if we go back to our code, if we were using resource ID, which is obviously the most preferred way, you would just use ID, okay? Come on. The next is you can find element by name. So you see like this text would be equals to name, right? So if we had a text, we could have used that as a name, right? We don't, so. And then obviously the class name, which we used, but for an XPath form. But if this element was the only button on that screen, we could have probably just used a class name, right? And probably get away with it. I don't suggest it. Remember we talked about class name. If they add another new button here, it will fail, right? So if you can, class name is really good for XPath. To building a custom XPath, class name is pretty consistent. Accessibility ID, it should work in theory. You see how content description is? So that's kind of what accessibility ID is. So if you, let's say, but it doesn't always work. Skip, right? And if we say accessibility, and that should work, right? But there's a reason I think we've done XPath but you can try this out, right? With your code base, go home, try out different ways and see if it works. But in this, if you use anything content descriptions, you can use accessibility ID approach. And then we just went over the UI automator and UI selector. I'm going to send you an article that's written by the Appium creator. So when he first came up with this, he wrote a long article why we should be using that, right? So you can definitely go here. Also, I think this is very important. If you want to go crazy, this is a newsletter for Appium, and it has like all the editions of 76 articles, right? So if you want to go, but this is initially started with Jonathan Lips, who's the architect of Appium, right? So he started to kind of give out on, how to do a lot of those different things, right? I mean, we're struggling with setting up. This guy wrote the whole thing, right? So you have to be a little bit crazy. But he also kind of create all this. But everything is not applicable to us, right? But you can kind of go through the high-level specific and don't try to learn everything. But you can also get an understanding of what an Appium can do, right? So it's pretty cool to like really get a full understanding of this stuff. So just Google Appium Pro and you should get into the newsletter. Yeah, and then the last one we went over, which is an XPath. Any questions? All right, so that's the first one. Any questions why we use the annotations? Good, right? All right, so let's go to the next one. Skip. So our goal is to hit this hamburger button, and then, but this is a menu page, right? So if we go back here, uh, you have to refresh it again, so it will load up this screen for you. And then if you go here, we okay, and then if you have a content descriptions, and let's see what we used. So we had to wait 30 seconds for some reason because it was started to load. So the whole load took 30 seconds. Guys, let's focus here a little bit. So here we are doing this. No. So here the XPath starts with. Again, we try to use the content descriptions. It didn't work, right? We needed to go into XPath, but what we had to do is first we are getting, I think, right? So the parent object, which is the very first occurrence of WebKit WebView, right? You see this one. So what this means is, hey, whenever you first see Android.WebKit.WebView class, stop there, right? Once you get there, then you need to navigate around and you say, hey, go to the first view. So when you kind of highlight it, so our menu falls within the first view, right? So we're saying, give me Android.view.view, and then do another slash, and that will be your very first button that you reach. That's your home button. Make sense?
Why you use button one?
Good question. So we're saying, whenever you reach Android.widget.button, press the first button you reach, right? So in our case, because if you say just button, it might go this other button here somewhere, right here, the floating button, right? So we have to say, click on the first button that you see. If you want to click on the floating one, you can change this to true, and it would work. Okay?
Should the index be 0?
No. When it comes to XPath, we start with index from 1. Don't ask me about why they did this, but we can go about that for another hour. But when you're writing XPath, indexes are starts from 1. Okay? No. Yes. Well, let's assume when it comes to XPath, indexes are 1, 2, 3, 4. There is no 0. Okay? When it comes to Java, indexes are starts from 0. All right? When it comes to XPath, writing XPath, indexes starts from 1. Make sense? All right. Then the last step is menu present, right? So sidebar header. So what we had to do is we have to go here, open up the menu, and do a little quick screenshot here. And yeah, we're just looking to see if this menu is open, right? So if I see this, that tells me that, okay, now this menu is open. For homework, what I want you to do is, obviously we got to this point, right? I want you to create some few more page objects. Click on login button. Very easy. You'll click on login button and enter some value here, like invalid value. Enter some. Okay, let's just do it together. Test at test.com. Enter some invalid value, and let's do login. It's logging in. So, right. Okay, you know what? Take anything, right? And then do a log out, and then hit this button, and make sure you see login back here. Okay? So the flow is, looks like it's taking anything. We'll hit a login. We'll enter some, right, data here. We'll hit a login. Once we get here, right, I want you to click the menu again and make sure you hit a log out again. Hit the menu again and make sure you're hitting the login button. Make sense? I'll write out the test scenario for you. And if you're not able to log in with, like, maybe it may not work for you, just create like a user, like, yeah, and logging in and anything. Make sense? Are we good, everyone? Homework? I mean, it has bugs. This is just test app, right? It's not like it's not a proper full-fledged app. Yeah. All right. Any questions from online?
So this is with the assumption that we are starting at the skip screen, because I was just playing around with that.
Here's the question. Let's listen to him. Go ahead again. Sorry.
No, so I was just playing around with the app, and like sometimes my tests were failing because I wasn't starting at the skip button screen. So
Okay.
I
So
guess
here's the
that's
thing, right? Actually, Gia mentioned this. It's pretty good. If you don't, you can write a logic, right? If you don't see a skip button, or if you hit an exception, right, then hit a menu button and then click on show tutorial and then run your test. It's really easy, right, Nirmal? So let's say you hit a skip and you start your app again, you're not going to see the tutorial. But what you're saying is, hey, if I don't see a skip button, right, then I want to hit a menu button, and then I would like to click on show tutorial, and then skip is available for you. So that's one way to do it. Other way is to delete the app, right? So that's another way you can go about it. Delete the app, and it will install an app every time. Make sense, Nirmal? Yeah, always have to build up those logics. Like anything that I didn't actually, you can scroll and get back to tutorial, right? So now that we know this, we can write this logic around and figure this part out. All right, so what I would do is I'll write up this scenario for you and try to complete this, and then we'll have next 3 classes after that. We're going to have some test cases. Now, again, if you don't want to participate on the web, the mobile part of it, I'm totally okay with it. You just let me know so we can create some scenarios for you as far as web goes. Okay, so if you're struggling with web, you need to continue to work with web. That's the number 1 priority. This is just a bonus thing, right? It's sort of, it helps you, but it's not everything.
You create scenarios, or we have to create ourselves?
No, the first scenario we just went over, right? But for the second scenarios, we're gonna create it on Jira board.
Oh, okay. I have a question about elements. On WebDriver, we have elements. How about we can get elements?
Yeah, same way.
Same spelling, elements. List elements. Private mobile element.
Yeah, what you do is you create a list. You do something like that, right? So that will give you all the elements.
Okay. Element, mobile element. Not one if because we had like elements, web elements, not web elements. It was plural.
No, I think you have to put this in a you have to put it in a list. So you still get mobile element, right? But you return it in a list form,
Okay.
right? So that should do it.
Because the web drivers they already had
Yeah,
has the
this one
web
doesn't have
elements
it.
because we can get
Yeah, but I think you can also do this. Let me see, wait. Get Appium driver. Yeah, you can do this. Yeah, I wouldn't go that way. It looks like because then you have to wrap. Actually, mobile elements doesn't do anything. It's pretty much kind of under the hood. It's still using mobile element, but it's returning it into a list form, right? It's saying get all the element, put it into this list object. Because even in mobile elements, we have to put the list bracket around.
if we have some calendars or something, we
Yeah.
have to get
Yeah, and
elements.
like I say, if you really run into a problem, right? Just I'll recommend.